Hello everyone and welcome to another video in this channel. This time a book review, and today I'm talking about Edmond Hamilton's City at World's End. Hopefully the camera is picking it up. I picked this up, I don't remember, either at a bookstore, at a used bookstore, or at a thrift store. I read it and I didn't necessarily think I would make a video on it. But then I saw that the online magazine Reactor did a review on it, and I read the review and I found what the reviewer had to say interesting, so I thought, hey, maybe it's worth doing a review here. So this video will be a review and maybe a critique or an analysis of this book, City at World's End by Edmond Hamilton, published in 1951. I believe. Anyway, we'll talk more about that. As is always the case in my videos, there will be spoilers. It's a 70-year-old plus book after all. But it's a primarily plot-driven story, so I would do recommend reading it or maybe reading about it before watching this video. Either way, I hope you do enjoy it. One moment, Keniston was strolling down the quiet street, lost in a pleasant reverie. The next moment, the sky split open. It split wide open, and above them was a burn and a blaze of light, so swift, so violent, that the air itself seemed to have burst into flame. Then there was silence, awful, suffocating silence. Keniston felt the chill of premonition, a shapeless terror that grew into a thing too evil to be borne along. This novel describes the shocking experience of a group of ordinary people catapulted by a mysterious explosion into the terrifying strange world of a million years hence. It's not a prophecy, but a warning. Okay, so this novel is pretty much a story of two halves that are kind of in contradiction with each other. The main character is a guy named John Keniston, a scientist, who for the majority of the novel, he's just referred to as Keniston. I think his first name, John, is only mentioned once or twice. But he's a scientist and works for a secret weapons research facility in a small town in the Midwest of the United States, which is actually called Middletown. Yes, the typical Midwestern town is called Middletown, and I think that does actually matter for the story. And one day, as he's heading to work, he witnesses the explosion of an atomic weapon, what they label in the book as a superatomic weapon, a new and untested weapon that has never been tried before in the world of this novel. But instead of killing everyone in the town, it seems to catapult the entire town millions of years into the future. They don't know this right away, of course, but after a while, after looking at the positions of the star, witness that the sun looks different, it looks big, red, and it's much cooler than the sun that they're used to. They explore the surroundings, etc. They realize that this must be the case. They realize that they are very likely being transported somehow. They don't know how, millions of years into the future. The Keniston and the other scientists and the other townspeople explore outside the borders, the limits of their town, and find that it's completely deserted. It's a deserted, dying world, completely different from the world that they left behind. They realize that Earth is dying, the sun is cooler, everything outside is colder, there is no vegetation to speak of. There are some animals here and there that they observe, but as far as they know, the citizens of Middletown are the last humans in existence. While they explore the surroundings, they find a domed, futuristic city just a few miles outside of their city limits, and they suspect the city is empty. The one that they find is empty, but they suspect that, okay, perhaps people used to live here at some point, but when they get there, they find nobody, so they assume that whoever lived there probably deserted it a long time ago. It is warmer in there than outside, and because the sun doesn't warm up the earth as much, they decide that it's probably for the best if the entire town from Middletown moves into this new domed city that they discover. They try to convince the townspeople to evacuate Middletown, but this doesn't go very well initially, even though the argument that they make is unquestionable. They can't survive on the outside. It's too cold. They do face quite a bit of resistance to this. They are Midwestern people, from the 50s after war. So they're not just going to get up and leave their hometown. You see, it's they're pretty attached to it, so they're going to put up a fight. But after a lot of debate and a lot of discussions, there's no other options. They eventually do decide to relocate because the other option is to die, and they obviously don't want that. So they relocate to the domed city, which they name New Middletown, and they try to make a life there. They try to figure out how all the futuristic technology that they find, they try to figure out how it works, try to restart the old atomic generators that they find there, any communication devices, and they also try, although not very hard, to see if there's anybody else that is left on Earth, if they are indeed the last humans on Earth. So that is roughly the first half of the novel. After that, a big, scary spaceship lands in front of Middletown, causing in front of New Middletown, causing quite a bit of commotion. And turns out humans are not extinct. They've just left Earth and settled into the galaxy. They waited, shivering in the cold wind, and as they waited, Kennison's mind rioted with speculation. This great vessel from outer space, whence had it come to dying Earth? From neighbor planets? From the further stars? Why had it come? And what was going on inside it now? What eyes were watching them? There is a central galactic government of sorts in which humans seem to play a central role. It's not entirely clear how that works, but there are also other species too. There are aliens, some of which are there with a spaceship in the landing party, and they cause quite a lot of commotion as the old 1950s people from Middletown witness aliens for the first time. There's a few funny interactions there. It's pretty stereotypical of what you'd expect from an interaction like that, but it kind of dies down pretty quickly, and for good reason, because it dies down as is about to become pretty tiresome. As you can imagine, there's a lot of stereotypical interactions of like old-timey people seeing furry aliens walking on two legs, etc. So it's that sort of thing, and it gets old quickly, but to the merit of the author, he doesn't linger too much into it. So the futuristic people from space come down, they introduce themselves to Middletonian, help them out, tell them how all the technology works, and everything seems to get, everyone seems to get along pretty nicely. They even start taking a liking to the aliens that arrive, but things seem to go sour when the futuristic people, the people that are in the spaceship, inform that they will have to eventually evacuate the planet because Earth is not habitable anymore. It's a pretty rough environment to live in, and it's getting colder and colder. And the galactic government has a ton of empty planets or nearly empty planets at their disposal, many of them which are very, very similar to the Earth that they knew. So it offers to simply relocate the entire town of Middleton to one of these planets. It wouldn't be a big deal. From the point of view of the government, this seems to be a fairly routine and simple to accomplish task. However, just like in the first half of the novel, where they had to move from Middletown to New Middletown, the Dome City, the Earth people won't have this. And this time, it's not just the people, but it's the signs as well. No way you're gonna take us off the planet. They say this is our home. Earth is our planet, even though it's completely unrecognizable from the time that they left. Still, they see it as the planet. They don't care about the reasons or the fact that Earth is almost uninhabitable. They refuse to leave, and the people from the future seem very perplexed that this has happened. Like, why would you not leave? It's obvious, right? We have a ton of planets. You're not gonna. It seems to be a fairly easy proposition, but the Earth, the Middletonians just won't have this. Things escalate to the point where the Middletonians take up arms against the people from the future. I mean, the people from space, the galactic government, even though their primitive rifles are pretty much useless against the lasers and energy weapons that the future people possess. Still, the Middletonians conclude that they would rather die than leave Earth. And that leaves the people from the galactic government in a bit of a pickle, because they don't want to kill these people. They just, in their, I suppose in their heads, they're doing it for the benefit of everyone, but I guess the Middletonians don't really see it that way. after quite a bit of tense back and forth between the two parties, Keniston tries to resolve this by appealing to the board of some regulatory body that I think they call it the board of governors or something like that. He has to travel to the Vega system, where it appears like the government is located or something like that, which is quite nerve-wracking for him. Obviously, nobody from his time has traveled into space, especially this interstellar travel. Nobody has even come close to that, so he's quite nervous. But he does take the trip. He does go to Vega to propose a solution, and the solution that they propose is sort of something that kind of comes out of nowhere. It's sort of a Deus Ex Machina, but there's this other character, this other scientist in the future that has discovered this new technology that can apparently revive dead planets. It can sort of reheat the core of the planets and can sort of like make Earth and other planets like Earth warmer, thus make them habitable for quite a while longer than they would normally be through normal planetary evolution. The whole thing is a bit confusing. It's kind of, like I said, it's a Deus Ex Machina. It doesn't really matter. It just, like, it's a way out for the characters and for the people who oppose the galactic government. But despite sort of like Keniston's appeal and the appeal of the other people who support Keniston, the board of governors concludes that this is too risky, and they deny the appeal. There might also be political reasons, or at least the claim is that there are political reasons for this denial, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But the appeal is denied. Keniston doesn't get a chance to save his planet, and they must proceed with a plan to evacuate Earth. Well, guess what? Keniston and a few of his alien buddies, because he's made friends with the aliens, of course, decide to try it anyway. They don't listen to what the Board of Governors said, and they defy their orders. They head back to Earth with the device in question that was supposed to save them. Despite being a risky technology, they decide to try it anyway, and lo and behold, it's a success, and everything is great now. The government is mad at them, but this is such a major thing for all life in the galaxy that they can't really punish Keniston and his alien buddies. So they just give him all a slap on the wrist, and everything is back to normal for all Middletonians. They don't have to leave Earth. They can just stay there. In fact, they don't even have to leave Middletown, because now the Earth is warmer. Even their old city that got transported, doesn't have a dome over it, is habitable now. So they can go back to that. So everything returns to normal, except Keniston, because he's experienced so much traveling to space and traveling to Vega. He can't just go back to his old Midwestern 50s American life. So he decides to kind of go with the people of the future, with a space government, and it's not clear what he does, but that's kind of his ending of the story. And pretty much everyone gets what they wanted. Like, nobody suffers. The government, I guess they didn't get everything that they wanted, but it worked out for them as well. So all's well that ends well. And that's pretty much the end of the story. The starships would continue to come. Now the Earth was habitable again. The people of the far stars would mingle with the people of Middletown, and the young men here would go out to the other suns, and gradually the whole strange story of Middletown would be absorbed into the stream of history. Keniston sent the jeep speeding towards the domed city. He felt now a sense of new freedom, a deep gratitude toward Carol, who had not tried to hold him back, but he felt, too, an uncertainty, a shrinking. Vast new horizons stretched before him now, the boundless horizons of space, the endless avenues of new thought. He was still a child of the older Earth, and it would be strange and lonely. Like I said, this is pretty much a story of two halves. The first half is the people, the Middletonians, trying to survive on this dying Earth, making difficult choices to survive, moving to town, exploring new technology, pondering, calculating logistics and all that. And then the second half is about them refusing to make the same difficult choices when someone else tells them that they have to. So that's what I said. There seems to be some contradiction between the first half and the second half of the novel. And I think it's kind of obvious by the way that I've described it, maybe, that I definitely preferred the first half of the novel over the second half. The first half of the novel, it's all about surviving in this new world, the dying Earth, which they use this exact phrase in the novel multiple times, with probably in reference to sort of like the sun going through a red giant face. And I'm not going to even bother with the science because it's definitely not accurate. But it's a dying planet. They even acknowledge this. But in the first half of the novel, it's a very interesting premise. A whole town transported millions of years into the future. It is. I don't think that idea had been done before at this point. We had ideas of people, individual, being transported back and forth into time, but this kind of whole town, which is pretty much an entire ecosystem on itself, being undergoing through this process and having kind of to survive with not only like the physical challenges but also the psychological challenges. I don't think it had been done before, and I'm not aware that it has been done very well, or in any it has been explored quite in this way since. So that's why I think it's the first half of the novel, it was quite something. It was quite interesting to read. I think it adds to the fascination of the novel that this is kind of a very plain Midwestern town with the idea that there was a secret weapons research facility, which is kind of mentioned in the beginning, and it's only used as a justification for why the town was possibly attacked in the beginning. This is literally just like the first 2-3 pages of the novel, and that fact doesn't seem to matter after that at all. In fact, the fact that these two are scientists doesn't seem to matter at all, or at least not a lot, but we'll get into that. But anyway, like this coalescence of different concepts that Hamilton kind of gets to play with is something that I really enjoyed reading, and enjoyed how the characters would deal with that. I think that like sometimes Hamilton treats the townspeople a little bit too plainly, a little bit too. It treats him as a little bit too simple. I think it's maybe a bit of a disservice to Hamilton's contemporaries at the time. For instance, like the city of Middletown has a mayor who's depicted as a complete buffoon. I mean, he has his heroic moments later, but for most of the novel, he's just happy to be told what to do. Especially in this crisis, we don't get to see him, I guess, at normal times. How he is. There's a certain charisma that Hamilton gives. I guess that would explain why he got elected as mayor. But overall, as soon as the crisis happens, the scientists are pretty much in charge. They just tell the mayor what to do, and the mayor is a figurehead. He is quite happy to just do what he's told, and I guess he wants to be in charge and wants to be the one doing the talking. But overall, he's just happy to be told what to do. And he's not particularly clever. He likes to drink, I think, or like to party. He likes to celebrate. But other than that, he plays no role in the survival of the city. The scientists pretty much take over. There's Keniston's fiance, who is also depicted fairly simplistically. She just wants a quiet life with a white picket fence, and that's pretty much the beginning and the end of her characterization in the novel. Nevertheless, the way that all characters have to kind of go through this and organize this is, like I said, pretty fascinating. It's a town of 50,000 people, and they have to eventually, once they decide to move, they have to move all of them in the new town, in the Dome City, which they later name Middletown. And they have to deal with finite resource. They have to deal with the fact that it's really cold, and it gets especially cold at night. They can't move in one day. They have to split it in multiple days, and they have to organize this clever. They're running out of gasoline, of course. They have little children and elderly people. People die. I mean, it's kind of brushed off eventually, but people do die, and I think it's something. It's, I think, brave of the novel to even sort of like tread that subject in what is essentially just an adventure novel. And they have to kind of manage their resources. They have to gather all their cars, kind of ration their gasoline. There's one character who kind of emerges from the town, who used to be an army driver or a supplies manager in the army or something like that, and he sort of takes charge and organize the move, and like divides the people in a way that would make the move most efficient. And maybe it sounds boring as I'm describing it, but I thought Hamilton did a really good job in making this interesting and really sort of like convincing you of the real peril that exists in this environment, and that even simple things like deciding what to do with the people in jail, right? Like it makes you, the author makes you care about that. And Hamilton doesn't spend a lot with characterization and world building. The plot goes pretty fast, and this is very much a plot-driven novel. But he still manages to just convey the important part just enough for you to care, and it makes the whole thing very very thought-provoking and very, very captivating and very interesting. So I enjoyed that part of the novel. I enjoyed it because, like, the novel makes you feel like it's going to be about survival in this world. They find a bunch of new technology in the new city, and they have to figure out how that works. They find sort of like this thing that they suspect is a communication device, and they have to figure out how that works if there are other people on Earth. Of course, they don't know that ends up being an interstellar communication device, but still, like, there's all that they kind of have to struggle with. There is one potential thing that the novel things makes you think you will explore is sort of like the psychology of the character, and it does this a little bit. But they might be the last people on Earth, and they've been sort of like transported essentially into an alien world. That would be pretty interesting. I would have liked to see that. Are there others in this Earth? Are we dealing with maybe monsters like a Morlock slash Eli H.G. Wells type of situation? But that's the disappointing part, is at least could be an expectation thing. Maybe I was just expecting the wrong thing, but it feels like the novel goes in this direction and then doesn't really explore any of that, because then, like I said, the second half seems to go in a completely different direction. It's a space people arrive, right? And I mean, logically, consistently makes sense that maybe people would have left Earth and been okay, like they didn't get stuck on this planet. But it's just the way the first half is written. It kind of makes you think, oh, okay, like it's a survival type of situation, and none of that happens. It's the second half, like there's a spaceship arrives, which happens completely unexpectedly. There's nothing in the first half of the novel to make you think, oh, there's going to be a space component to this story. There are, like I said, there are hints. There are, like, they attempt, the Middletonians, once they arrive into the Dome City, they attempt to communicate with others, but there's absolutely no hint that these others will be from space, right? Like, there's nothing, but it just happens, and the plot goes in a completely different direction. Like I said, it could just be me. Maybe I read something that wasn't there. Maybe my expectations were misguided, but I don't know. I feel like there is an entirely different conflict in the first half of the movie, an entirely different conflict in the second half of the movie, and one doesn't come from the other. It feels like two separate components that have been just kind of put together. And I don't know, it didn't work for me. But even that, I could maybe live with. The thing that kind of infuriated me about the second half of the novel, more so than kind of this change of direction, which is not ideal but fine, is some of the character choices, some of the character interaction, especially with the Middletonians, sort of like the dilemmas, or lack thereof, rather, that kind of frustrated me. I think one fundamental problem, and this is kind of not fair because I'm trying to maybe read into the author's motivations, but whatever, is that I think the author had already decided what the right answer was for a lot of, what the character choices was, that it kind of like flew in the face of everything that maybe wouldn't have made logical sense, or that it would have maintained some kind of logical consistency. Like, for example, that, like, the Middletonians have to leave the Earth because the planet is uninhabitable. They're just a fact. That is a scientific fact for most of the novel. Yes, we have the technology, the magical technology at the end that ends up saving the planet. But for most of the story, the characters don't know that. Especially the Middletonians have no idea about that. Yet they kind of refuse to engage with this idea that Earth is uninhabitable. Even the super smart scientists, who, I get it, they're super smart in the 1950s in their time, but millions of years into the future, maybe they're as dumb as everyone else compared to the contemporary people, the people from the future, as I've been calling them. But it just seems contradictory, based on the fact that they had to leave their town for the Dome City, which they call New Middletown, just a few days ago. I forget how much time passes, but it doesn't matter. And yet they refuse to make the same choice, or even acknowledge the fact that they might have to leave, like, Earth entirely because of the same reasons that they had left Middletown. They seem to think that they somehow will magically figure it out. Like somehow magically it will work out for them if they stay on Earth, but they don't. There's this kind of frustrating refusal to even at least wrestle with the idea that maybe it would be better to leave. Even it's one thing to express fear, it's one thing to just express anxiety and kind of argue with them and consider the dilemma, debate it, and then maybe even still conclude that it's better to stay on Earth. Like, I would have been fine if they, after everything they said, you know what, you make sense, why you want us to leave, but no, this is our home and we will make it work here. This novel doesn't do that, or it does it in the most shallow and ridiculous way possible. In fact, that nobody really considers it, even though the people from the future tell them so. The Middletonians are so stubborn that they just completely ignore any presentation of fact, of just simple cold fact that the Earth is not habitable. They just simply brush it aside. And even when the rare times that it seems like the novel sort of acknowledges that there is a dilemma there, when the authors, when the characters say, oh, we'll die before leave this planet, well, that's what happen. And when it's acknowledged, the few times that sort of the novel acknowledges, it's kind of the author acknowledging it rather than any given character. And it's so, like I said, so shallow. It's almost against his will that the author is kind of forced to acknowledge it. And it's, for the characters, it's just a complete non-starter. And like I said, it goes down to what I said earlier, that the townspeople, I think I treated maybe too simple-minded, as essentially a simpleton who could not possibly exhibit this understanding or curiosity about why it is that the government is asking this, and it's why is it that people from future are sort of insisting that they relocate. Like I said, I'm not even arguing that they should relocate. That's not what it's this kind of lack of a dilemma that the author refuses to have the characters engage with, that I just found so, again, I keep using the word frustrating because I can't put it in any other way. It's not even the townspeople that are depicted as simpletons from the beginning. Even the scientists like Keniston and another scientist, which is also his best friend, I think his name is Hubble. And they're supposed to, in their time, they're supposed to be at the cutting edge of research, right? They were working at a secret facility, which, like I said, seems to have absolutely no bearing for most of the story. And they show absolutely no curiosity for the future. They show no curiosity for what space travel might be like. Even the idea of flying to space and leaving space is just a completely abhorrent idea to them, that they would get to do it. It felt so unlike them. Like I said, Keniston eventually has to go to space. It's almost forced with. And when he realized that he has to do, he's like, oh my God, how am I going to survive this? It's so unnerving and so scary. Again, it's ridiculous. I get it. For people for the 50s being presented with the idea of traveling to the stars, it would be terrifying, but I would have liked to see this idea of people in the 50s where, science fiction was big then. The scientists worked on cutting edge thing. They could have shown some curiosity. Oh, it must be wonderful, right? They could have shown that curiosity for the ideas of what all the technology that exists in the future that wasn't available in their time, the new science and all that. But they just don't. They just take it for a fact that they will not understand it, and they simply take the stance of the rest of the town that we don't care what the facts are, we just want to stay here. It's as simple as that, and it's every argument is essentially reduced to that. And I kind of hate how the novel doesn't at least engage with the debate and the idea. And the other reason why was just such a dumb thing is that these people, the Middletonians, were transported from the 1950s to millions of years into the future, except the little town which was transported with them. The rest of Earth is unrecognizable to them. They just, it might as well be an alien planet, and they abandon their little town. They know they can't live there, so everything else is completely foreign to them. I just don't see how you could make the argument that if they were relocated to any other town, which might have been closer to what Earth looked like at their time, because they promised them that. I don't see what clinging to a dying Earth, as the author and even the characters often refer to it, I don't see the difference, right? And again, maybe this is just personal, but like I said, I don't necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily want the characters to agree with me. It's just I would have liked to see this kind of debate, the wrestling with this idea, the dilemma, and just there's none of it in the novel. It doesn't make any sense other than maybe some vague patriotic or nationalistic or whatever the equivalent of nationalism is for a planet. I don't know. An aching nostalgia took him again, the haunting homesickness for an earth lost forever, for the smell of leaves burning on crisp fall nights, for a clover field under the summer sun, for the blue skies and green hills, the snowy mountains and the sleepy villages and the old cities and the roads that went between them, for all that was gone and could never be again. It made him long even for the earth that still was, the tired, dying old planet that at least held memory of the world he had known, the people there who had known that world too. Carol was right. The old ways and the old things were best. What was he doing out here in these alien immensities? This is the main conflict. It isn't really a conflict. It's like one side says you have to move, the other side says no, and they just come to the clash over it, and that's it. That's really the conflict, and there's no way out of that, right? There's nothing. There's no character arc. There's no character learning moment. There's nothing except like the Deus Ex Machina. That's the only way to get out of that, and that's what happens. There's a Deus Ex Machina at the end of the novel, and that's really how the novel ends, right? Like, which is a cop out in my opinion. Like, I was so angry reading the second half. I loved the first half, and then the second half, like watching all these interactions that made no sense to me. I was so angry. I wanted to pull my hair out the whole time, and that's terrible because I don't have that many left. So it made me so angry. And I wish it had gone differently. Like, I guess that's my belabored point on this part. I think the author, Hamilton, I think kind of maybe recognized this in the end, this flaw in the story or in the logic of the story, because his main character at the end does not return to Middletown. He sort of like chooses to go with the future people, with the people from space. At the end, like I mentioned in the plot summary, but again, it happens so sudden. Like, there's no arc there. It feels unearned. There isn't really a realization for him to sort of like slowly kind of become disillusioned with his old life and more attracted to this new way of life, let's say. There is none of that. Like, the entire time of the novel, or pretty much the entire time, he is firmly in the camp with the others. And then towards the end, not at the very end, but almost at the very end, he's like, wait a minute, I don't think I fit in with these people anymore. It just happens all of a sudden. And like I said, it's unearned. I think it's sort of like a too late course correction from the author. I'm not sure. Like I said, maybe I'm just reading too much into, I'm trying to estimate the intentions of the author, but that's how it felt to me. It felt as though the author kind of realized he fucked up and then didn't want to rewrite the whole thing, so he just kind of tacked that at the end. And you could argue maybe that all this is meant as a subtle critique for like the Middletonians, but somehow I don't think this is the case. That said, so I spent several minutes trashing this second half of the novel. That said, even though I hated so much of it, I still found it interesting to read. I still sort of like found myself turning page after page, interested in what was going to happen next, invested into what was going to happen next. There was always tension. There was, you were always at the edge of your seat. We're trying to anticipate what happens next. I think it's a very well written story, and I think that's a testament to Hamilton's writing ability. I think he knows how to tell an adventure story like this, and that shows. Like I said, it's very focused on the plot. There's not a lot of character development or world building, at least in a traditional sense. I think the author relies maybe a bit too much on tropes, on established science fiction tropes of the time, especially in the second half versus the first half, which I thought was perhaps a little bit more original. But again, the plot moves forward like so well. Like, the author is so, I think, skilled in kind of writing this kind of plots that it just kept me interested the entire time. In fact, it kind of reminded me of that Raymond Chandler quote about sort of like writing for the pulps in the 1930s, where he said, if you don't know what to write next, just have two guys with guns show up, and you'll always figure it out after that. And that's kind of how this novel maybe felt. Like the author didn't know what to write next, or maybe he was too lazy to kind of develop all those kind of interesting things about them surviving in a dying planet. So he said, I'll just have bad government people show up and let's see what happens after that. And like many times in the second half of the novel, he felt like that's what was happening. And like I said, like, despite my complaints, it was a fairly entertaining, fairly fun to read. like I said, you're invested in what happens to the character, what happens to the townspeople, as foolish as they act. And I think that's kind of like both the positive and the negative of this style of writing that is firmly sort of like from the pulp era, where you have entertaining, fun, fast-moving plots, but maybe you miss out some of the more like meaty, logical, like heavy concepts that science fiction was so much known for at the time, and you just kind of get like a simple by the books adventure story, which, like I said, it's fun, but I wish the novel had explored some of these other more heavy ideas, and whatever conclusion they reached afterwards, I wish there was a little bit more thought-provoking stuff in the second half of the novel, like there were in the first half. Like I mentioned, I'm not even going to talk about the science of this novel. It's atrocious for the most part, but it's so easy to let it go because, again, that's what pulp fiction is, right? You don't really bother with the any kind of scientific accuracy for this. It never once kind of I kind of stopped and said, oh, this is terrible, like this takes me out of the story. That never happened. So I think that just kind of like it goes again, it's part of your expectations. You're willing to suspend disbelief that for this kind of story that has a pulpy character to it, you're very willing to do that. And I found myself doing exactly that when I was reading this novel. And all that kind of makes sense when you consider who the author is. Edmond Hamilton, he came from the pulp era of science fiction. He didn't only write science fiction. In fact, I think he may have written more comic books than he wrote science fiction. I'm not sure about that. At the time, I think he was maybe better known for his comic books, but he wrote a lot of science fiction as well. And as a writer, he matured at the golden age of science fiction, but he did come from the pulp era. And I think a lot of his work, a lot of his writing, even though I haven't read anything other than this book, so the City at World's End, I think a lot of his writing, from what I read about him, seems to maintain this pulp sensibility. For better or worse, he's not that well known today. He was, I think, probably a reasonably well-known name in his lifetime, but today his reputation has kind of died down. Perhaps he's somewhat known in science fiction circles, but I suspect he's more known for being the husband of Lee Brackett. Lee Brackett is also not that popular today, but she is probably more popular or better known than Edmond Hamilton. In addition to writing science fiction novels and stories, she was one of the few women that was actively writing science fiction at the time, but she's perhaps better known for being a very successful producer and screenwriter in Hollywood. She collaborated a lot with Howard Hawks. I think she wrote The Big Sleep, Rio Grande, maybe. She wrote The Long Goodbye, which was directed by Robert Altman, great movie. And she's also known for having written the first draft of a little-known movie called Empire Strikes Back. But as far as science fiction, especially science fiction prose writing is concerned, I don't think either Hamilton or Lee Brackett are particularly well known today. Speaking of women in science fiction, the novel doesn't treat women characters particularly well. Not that there are that many. There are only two sort of women characters that are kind of featured prominently somewhat in the novel. One is Keniston's fiance, who I already mentioned. Her name is Carol, I believe. And she's as bland as a character as they come. She's often described as kind of hysterical and easily giving to emotions. Obviously a typical description, I think, for women in the 50s and the 40s. And her only concern in life, as depicted in the novel, seems to be to live a simple, boring life in her hometown as a housewife. That's all she cares about. That's pretty much all she kind of mentions when her character appears, which is not that often, actually. But that seems to be sort of like her only reason for existence, to kind of like remind Keniston of what they are kind of leaving behind, is like this like typical like 1950s domestic life. And that's really all she is there to remind us as a character in the novel. Another prominent female character is Varn Allen, who arrives on the spaceship, and she's a little bit more prominently featured, I believe. She is the administrator of the section of space where Earth is. And I think she's a far more interesting character in the novel than Carol, the fiance of Keniston. For some reason, the way she's described as blonde and tall and authoritative reminded me a lot of that blonde character, the blonde woman in the Nazi blonde woman in Indiana Jones 3. I don't remember what her name is, but that's kind of how she's described. And while reading, every time I saw her name come up, that's kind of who I pictured in my head. But anyway, for most of the novel, she's described as sort of like cold and overly authoritative, devoted to her job, mostly good at her job, although the novel doesn't really spend that much into that. She has a lot of competition. She had a lot of competition for the job, which she won, etc., etc., that kind of thing. And she warms up to the main characters and their plea as the novel goes on. I think she might be the only character that has an actual arc in this novel. She's also probably the most reasonable person in the novel, probably a person who is kind of willing to see both sides. She's loyal to her position and wants to do a good job, but she's also sympathetic to the people from Middletown and why they want to stay. Even then, the author can't help but sort of like cast her in a light of she's just putting on a mask, but deep down she's just a scared, sensitive little woman who just wants to she doesn't want all these big boy responsibility, and she just wants to wear pretty dresses or whatever. I forget exactly what the one part in the novel is, but it's that sort of like there's one key interaction between her and Keniston where she kind of breaks down into tears, and it up until that point she was sort of like depicted in one way, and I felt that was a little bit uncharacteristic of her character, because like I said, I don't think this novel treats women characters at all very well, but it's not too egregious. I think it's maybe passable. You're able to let it go, as the character I think is interesting enough and is overall portrayed in a positive and capable light.
He knew by the white wrath in her face that he had thrust beneath that serious, composed exterior at last, that the competent, brilliant official had emotions like any other woman, and that he had got to them. My position, my official rank, do you think I am like Lund, that the power to give orders is pleasure to me? What would you, a primitive, know of the tradition of service to the Federation? Do you suppose I wanted to follow my family tradition? That I enjoyed the years of study when other girls were dancing? That my idea of a happy life is to spend it in starship cabins and on unfriendly worlds? Do you think all that is so dear to me that I would worry and plot and come pleading to a primitive to keep it?
But all of these moments, like I said, the depiction of women in the novel, the depiction of sort of like the futuristic people, the Middletonians, how they interact, how Keniston and his fiance interact, how the refusal for them to see the other side, and how the refusal to kind of accept simple facts, like all these little moments gave me sort of like this vague sense of anti-progress, or like this sort of like pro-stagnation sense that the novel is for, this kind of disdain for progress, I guess, that permeates. And even though, like I said, Keniston at the end moves on and chooses like the future, sort of out of nowhere, but that doesn't matter. Pretty much everyone else goes back to the town. Like, they absolutely have no interest in... I don't remember if Keniston is the only one, or maybe there's like a handful of other people from Middleton that stay on. But again, it doesn't matter, because they get absolutely no time to them. It's like, it's all about the majority of the townspeople that kind of go back to Middleton, and they essentially... I don't know how this will happen, but they get to live the sort of like their typical 1950s like small town American life that it happens due to this complete Deus Ex Machina that is introduced towards the end of the novel, and that is the happy ending in the novel. And that's, like I said, I can't help but that, like, think of that as a tinge of like anti-progressivism that kind of maybe the novel deals with. There's one particular interesting interaction between Carol and Keniston fairly early in the novel, I believe, where sort of like they kind of like analyze their predicament where they are, and Carol blames Keniston for all the science. So she essentially blames all the scientists, and he said, if you weren't working on like your fancy things, like none of this would happen, because again, the fact that there was like a secret like research laboratory in the town is what made them a target in the beginning of the novel. The discussions of how, the responsibility of science and how far scientists can go and all that was very prevalent in science fiction at the time. I don't have a problem with any of that. It's just that, again, the novel completely refusal to engage with this idea, to kind of like argue with it and debate and maybe present like the nuanced version of like, wait a second, okay, like you surely wouldn't have, like, you come from the 1950s, you probably didn't want to live like the 1650s, right? So I think the hypocrisy there is clear, but none of that matters. The matter is that it's just, they say something and it's just taken as given. Like even Keniston, I think there is an inner monologue there where he says, well, I guess she's right. What can I say? It doesn't say anything. He just says, oh, don't be hysterical, woman, or something like that. Like this is not like this. It was just one throwaway line in the novel, but I think it definitely is a very typical, and I think it kind of maybe like reveals what the author was perhaps thinking as he was writing this novel. They just like, that's kind of the stance that he takes. It almost felt like, and again, maybe I'm perhaps reading into the intentions of the mind of the author without really knowing that much, but I got the sense that he was talking directly to his contemporaries, so like small town Americans of his time. And Hamilton also lived in a small town in Ohio, I believe, during this time, where he was like almost saying, what you have is now perfect. It's the pinnacle of social organization, the pinnacle of civilization. You'll never want anything more. So just hold on tight to what you have and don't worry about anything else. Like you're good. And that's kind of how like it felt at times reading this novel, and how obsessed the characters were with kind of returning to that kind of life. And I guess maybe perhaps other people would see it differently. Maybe there's like a sense of nostalgia there, but I don't know. That's kind of how I read it. And it felt maybe perhaps like, if that's true, I felt like that would be antithetical to why people read science fiction at the time. Again, this is the 1950s. This was the golden age of science fiction. People read science fiction because they kind of wanted this, so like these futuristic adventures. They wanted space travel, exotic planets, intergalactic civilization. People were excited about these things. So to kind of have like this regressive attitude where, no, we don't care about all that. This 1950s Midwestern town is what we really, really want. That's why I said I think there is maybe a sense of, I don't know what to say. I don't want to say anti-progress, but it's almost like I don't know how else to put it, but it's kind of like the opposite is presented as terrifying to both the author and the characters, even the scientists who are supposed to be at the cutting edge of things. And it's like better to stay on a dying planet than even to allow like a tiny bit of like change or progress into the lives of these characters. And I guess I'll leave it at that. Again, you could argue maybe that this is a criticism, that he's kind of presenting things as he sees them and it's meant to be critical, rather than endorsing these ideas. But somehow I don't think that is the case. I didn't see much evidence of that, although I don't know, maybe that is the case. Maybe perhaps someone else can point that out if that is the case. There's also something else that I as I was doing research for this, as I was reading reviews and other takes on this, on Hamilton in general, I guess, not maybe specifically for this novel, but I read that there was a sense of anti-colonialism, a criticism of colonialism in this novel, and you can sort of see where that comes from. The Earthlings refuse to leave their sort of native land at the behest of a biggest centralized power, and it's not just the Earthlings. So as we sort of like find out when as this whole conflict evolves, that like this happens all the time. Like there are many alien species that have left their planets for similar reasons, have been relocated to other planets, and they have not had any recourse to fight this. It just has happened because the galactic government has kind of like ordered this to happen. And you also get the sense that the galactic government is human dominated, and other species don't necessarily have don't have the same representation. This was not exactly clear. Like I said, the novel doesn't go too deep into world building. It just presents almost exactly what you need to know for the scene, and then just moves on to other things. It's not clear, but you do get that sense. And you do get like the impression that the government simply exerts its authority without question to other species and cultures. But where this falls apart, in my opinion, is that even if that's the case, you still can't argue with the science, with the facts. Like every evacuation, as the characters discuss this, has happened because the planet in question is dying. Like it hasn't just evacuated people because it wants to steal their land or economic reasons, etc. Again, you could argue it's infringing on the right to die in your own planet. And maybe that's an argument to be had. Not that the book bothers with that. But it somehow does not seem as egregious, again, because again, like the fact is simply, like unquestionably, the planet Earth or the other planets that they have done this to are dying. They're not going to be able to support life anymore. So unless you want to die with them, you kind of have to relocate. And where you stand on kind of like forcefully keeping them alive or not, I don't know. Like I'm not going to comment on that. But again, comparing that to real life colonialism doesn't seem like there is a one-to-one correspondence. Some of the characters do make the case that the government does this to sort of like keep political power and maintains authority, which may be true, but again, you can't argue with the science, right? If the planet is dying, that's again a magical device aside that somehow revives planet that kind of came out in like at the end of the novel. Like presumably the galactic government has existed for thousands, if not millions of years. I don't know. It's never specified again, but they've been doing this for a long time, right? So like no such technology existed for most of the time that they've been doing this. So there might be some political misalignment there, maybe some sort of like corruption there. But like I said, in the end, you can't really argue with the fact that if a planet is dying, people have to move one way or another. So I don't know. Again, maybe there's a more sophisticated argument to be made there, but like I don't see this being, at least not directly being sort of like an analog for like colonialism as it exists and has existed in the real world. And also, I'm doing the thing again where I try to interpret the author's intention. But while reading this, I kept getting the feeling that the galactic government did not so much stand for or was a metaphor for colonialism, but more so as a metaphor or an analog for big government as it was understood, or as it is often understood in the context of American politics. And that's kind of how the Middletonians, the people from Middletown, respond to it, like the very typical 20th century respond to it, at least by some stereotypes. And it was treated more as such, as rather than opposition to colonialism. Again, maybe you could make the case that the two have some overlap, but at least that's how I read it. But even if we ignore that, even if we take this all like the novel at face value, again, I'm not sure any like like I said, I'm not sure there is a correspondence, a one-to-one correspondence between the same thing happening in a science fictional setting versus the same thing happening in the real world as it has happened. Like they do the same thing. There's a very similar plot line, which is very much more obviously about colonialism in the show Star Trek Deep Space Nine. In fact, it's a big plot element of the early seasons. And I think that's universally it's one of the things that is kind of universally panned, the plot line of DS9 that's universally at least not as well regarded compared to the Dominion War, which happens later, and that's what everybody loves about that show. But when on Earth, it's different compared to a fictional scenario of a dying planet where you also have infinite resources and virtually infinite planets to relocate. Right? The concept of native land and the concept of ownership maybe doesn't have the same meaning when you live in a society where pretty much everything is provided for you and there's no shortage of resources, there's no shortage of land, of opportunities and all that. So that's why I say maybe you can make the case for some like emotional or psychological connection to the place. But like I said, I don't think there is a one-to-one correspondence. I think it's more complicated when this conflict is depicted especially in science fiction, versus when it's depicted in the real world or maybe other types of fiction. So that's why, for many reasons, I just don't think that works in something like this book and many other examples like it that have existed or have been depicted in science fiction. Anyway, I think that's all I had to say on the novel City at World's End by Edmond Hamilton. I would not say that it's a must-read, whether you are a science fiction fan or you're not a science fiction fan. So, yeah, I would not say it's a must-read, but I would say it is a fun read. It's short, it's a very tiny book. You can get through it pretty quickly. So if you stumble on it, or if you have a free afternoon or whatever, however long it takes you to read a book like this, I would still pick it up. I think it's a fun read. You get through it pretty quickly. And like I said, it was fun to read despite by many objections that I had for it. All right. That's all I had to say. That's all I wanted to say about this book. Again, the book is Edmond Hamilton, City at World's End. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did enjoy it, please consider liking and subscribing to this channel. I have a lot more fun videos planned ahead. And hopefully I will see you next time.